Welcome to the Greatest Plays Bracket Podcast, brought to you by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. I am John Schmeelk, joined by the voice of the Giants, Bob Papa. As part of the Giants' 100th anniversary celebration, our panel of experts have selected the 64 greatest plays in Giants history. We've separated them into 4 16-group brackets, and you get to vote on what you think the greatest Giants play is. And we'll have a podcast for each one of the 16 brackets. Bob, this time we're doing the white bracket, and the reason we've selected it as the white bracket is because of the number 1 seed. David Tyree's helmet catch, the Giants obviously in their white uniforms for Super Bowl 42. But I got to tell you, this is a feisty 16 seed, Bob. We go back just 2 weeks in the calendar. We have Corey Webster intercepting Brett Favre in overtime of the NFC title game to set up that Lawrence Tynes game-winning field goal.
This is a very interesting bracket, really, in a nutshell, because it really depends what your flavor is as far as how these plays were even ranked. I mean, think about number 2, George Martin's 78-yard pick six against the Broncos in Giants Stadium, which was a precursor to what the Giants would do in winning Super Bowl 21. I mean, this bracket is so tough that a fake punt in the NFC Championship game, Gary Reason's play in the 1990 NFC Championship season, is only the 15 seed. That's a pretty tall order.
Absolutely. So let's start with that 116 matchup, Bob, and obviously 2 very pivotal plays in the Giants getting their 3rd Super Bowl championship.
Well, yeah, I mean, the helmet catch with Tyree is one of the greatest catches in the history of the Super Bowl. So I'm not trying to sway any voters here, but I have a feeling that that's going to be heavily favored by the fans. But, you can't forget about Corey Webster's pick six, because the Giants go into overtime in Green Bay. The Packers have the ball first, and Favre throws it late on an out route and behind. And before we started taping, you made a really good point. I mean, how many times do we see DBs drop wide open interceptions? Now throw in minus 21 below wind chill factor. DBs are paid to cover, not necessarily catch the ball. So Corey's interception certainly deserves a place in this bracket.
And without that pick, who knows if Lawrence Tynes ever gets the opportunity to kick a potential game-winning field goal in that game. Now, the 8-9 seed is always fun, Bob. It's always interesting in any tournament to very closely bracketed plays, and we have a modern and we have an older play in this group. Let's start with the Summerall field goal, a 49-yard, we think, field goal to beat the Browns in the 1958 regular season finale. This was in the snow, so nobody really knows how long this field goal is. Pat Summerall says it's 50+, so this is a fun play that helps set up some historic Giant games down the road.
Yeah, I mean, heck, my dad was at this game standing on the field as a young man, and he says it was good. I mean, there's a lot of discrepancies as to whether the kick was good or not, how far it was from. You think modern terms, and Adam Vinatieri kicking that field goal for the Patriots against the Raiders in the playoffs. Well, this was that. And without this, I mean, this is the regular season finale, setting up for the postseason. And when you think about the conditions, the equipment that was being used at the time, this is one truly the greatest plays in the history of the Giants.
And without this, you're never going to get the greatest game ever played, which is what happens after this game-winning field goal from Summerall. And this is also one of Wellington Mara's favorite plays as well, helping that Giant team.
It's kind of interesting because there's snow involved in this one, and there's snow involved in the matchup that this play is against with Ahmad Bradshaw, because if you remember in the 2007 season, the Giants were teetering down the stretch. They had to go win in Buffalo because, hey, listen, you're playing an undefeated Patriot team in the regular season finale. The odds are stacked against you. And Ahmad Bradshaw's run in a game that had sun, it had rain, it had sleet, and it had snow.
And wind.
And this play put the Giants, into the postseason and guaranteed them a playoff spot. So weather conditions, a big factor on these two plays.
88-yard run, and that was one of the games that helped the Giants get into the postseason that year. All right, let's jump to the 5-12 matchup here, Bob. You have the 4th and 17 play. Phil Simms to Bobby Johnson in Minnesota in 1986. Phil Simms has called this his favorite game that he's played in his career.
Yeah, this was very significant, right? Because the Giants were known for having a great defense. but Phil Simms had to make a play. And he reminded Bobby Johnson before the play, hey, Bobby, don't fall asleep on this. I could be coming to you. And it was executed to perfection. You know, Simms had taken a beating in this football game, took a lot of hits, and he stood in the face of a tremendous rush. And this is kind of an interesting matchup because I think that gave the Giants offense confidence for the rest of that season. We knew the defense had a tremendous amount of confidence, but I think this game gave the entire team confidence in what they were doing offensively. And then it's going against the Carl Banks sack of Danny White in which he breaks his wrist. I don't want to get too dramatic here, but it's almost as if it broke the reign of the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys were still in contention, and Danny White was the quarterback. Roger Staubach had long since retired at this point, but the Cowboys were still the Cowboys. And I think this sack and the breaking of Danny White's wrist and the Giants beating the Cowboys kind of ended a long era for the Dallas Cowboys because they weren't to be heard from again until years later.
Yeah, Jerry Jones buys the team. Tom Landry is removed as head coach, and you're right, this was their last run. And going back to the Simms play, great toe tap by Bobby Johnson on the play that set up a game-winning field goal, give the Giants a 22-20 victory. So two great plays there. Let's go to the 4-13 matchup here, Bob. And boy, the first one, it's a play that we've all seen a million times. Montana rolls right, avoids LT. Here comes Leonard Marshall. And talking about ending dynasties, that was the last snap Joe Montana would take as a member of the 49ers.
He wouldn't even play the next year. He was out the whole year with an injury. Obviously, that was an epic game. The Niners were going for a three-peat. But the Giants had a matchup against San Francisco. They played so well against them all the time. And the thing about this play that makes it amazing is that Leonard Marshall was blocked.
Yeah.
And Leonard Marshall was on the ground. And Leonard Marshall got back up and continued to pursue Montana to get this hit. Steve Young had to go into the game. Roger Craig eventually fumbled. And obviously Matt Barr kicked the game-winning field goal to end the three-peat, which led to the Giants going on to win Super Bowl 25. And then obviously Tiki Barber in D.C. Listen, the Giants in Washington, they're playing a tough game. Tiki basically had the team on his back. He ran for 234 yards in the game. And this one was like to seal the deal in the victory. And remember, the Giants made it to the postseason that year. So these are two very pivotal, unbelievable performances. And I think what really stands out about it is the individual effort that was given, not only by Tiki, but by Leonard Marshall getting off the ground and making the hit on Montana.
234 rushing yards in that game for Tiki Barber. And in one of our other brackets, as you watch these other podcasts, there's another big-time Tiki Barber game at the end of the season as well. So keep an eye out for that. All right, let's jump out to the 6 and 11 seed here, Bob. You have an Emlyn Tunnell return for a touchdown, and one of the greatest Giants of all time, first African-American player in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, great defender, great returner.
Mr. Offense on Defense. That was his nickname, Emlyn Tunnell. Not only was he great in the return game, and he was great defensively as far as interceptions were concerned, but he was a genuine threat returning interceptions. I think one season he had more interception return yards than like guys had rushing in a season. He is one of the all-time great, not only Giants of all time, he's one of the greatest players in the history of the National Football League. And it's going against Victor Cruz, which everybody remembers the game in Philly. I mean, Victor almost got cut because he had dropped a pass in the season opener. He gets a chance against Philadelphia, and he winds up going against a very good Eagles defense and having really a game for the ages, which uncorked a wild season for Victor Cruz. This thing with Victor Cruz is pretty cool because it comes out of nowhere. Yeah. Nobody expected it with what Victor was able to do.
Yeah, barely made the roster for 2 straight years. The hamstring injury kind of kept him on the first year, and then he just made it the second year. Almost didn't. It was really close to whether or not he'd be on that 53, and then that was history as he exploded against Philadelphia, and we know what a great Giants career he had. All right, number 3 verse 14, Thanksgiving, Bob. It's our first appearance in this bracket from Lawrence Taylor. 97-yard interception return against Detroit. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, how many times have you seen this highlight? I mean, first of all, the one cool thing about it is his anticipation and ranging out to his right to make the interception. But then, you know, especially with this being a younger Lawrence Taylor, 1982, only his second year in the league, the speed. I mean, nobody's closing on him. He's taken off and he's gone. Obviously, an individual effort for the ages, and it's one of the most memorable plays in the history of the Giants because you've seen it a million times. But let's not sleep on Ron Johnson, 1970 against Washington at Yankee Stadium. I guess we're not sleeping on it because, like, he was one of my favorite players as a kid. And this is when I first started being able to watch and understand Giants football. I mean, I was 6 at the time of this. But I remember anytime the Giants played Washington, especially hearing all the stories about what had happened in the 60s with Sam Huff and everything, it was pretty cool. And this 1970s Giants team was a very good football team that nearly made the playoffs. So this Ron Johnson touchdown run, this crazy comeback, I think they were down, 20 or 19 or 20 points in the game. It's a memorable play that should not be forgotten for sure.
Yeah, he finished with 136 rushing yards in that game, 6 receptions for 49 yards. Really nice game for him, and a really nice moment here going up against LT. Ron Johnson taking that underdog role in this 3-14 matchup. All right, now let's jump to the 7-10 matchup here, Bob. And we're going to go back in time for the first one. Though you watch this play, and there's a reverse involved. There's like an option pitch fake involved. It's an unbelievable play where Frank Gifford laterals it to Charlie Connolly, the quarterback, in the Eastern Conference playoff victory over the Browns in 1958. And that's going up against the big Rodney Hampton run.
Yeah, I mean, remember, this comes a week after the Summerall field goal. So now it's the playoff game, which then leads to the game against the Colts, the championship game. And this kind of goes to show you the versatility of the Giants offensively with Vince Lombardi calling the plays. Because remember, he was the offensive coordinator at the time. And, we see so many different things in today's game, and obviously teams around the National Football League have all these cool schemes and stuff. Well, a lot of it is just imitation, or it's copying and taking something from the past. And this shows the brilliance of Vince Lombardi as an offensive coordinator, as they had the Browns totally off kilter. And then you match it up with Hampton. I mean, Rodney, this 51-yard touchdown run against the Minnesota Vikings, it's his speed, it's his power, it's everything that made Rodney Hampton a special football player. And, it's tough to pick between these two plays because they're both significant. They happened in the postseason. But they come in different shapes and sizes.
And, Rodney Hampton's one of those guys, Bob, where if he doesn't suffer that knee injury or he suffers it in a more modern era where their surgical procedures are better, he could go down as one of the greatest running backs in the history of the team.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. And he, at one point, Rodney did hold the franchise record for the most rushing yards in his final season with the Giants. He went past Joe Morris and then eventually eclipsed by Tiki Barber. But Rodney had it all. When he first came in, he was super fast, and then as the team changed, he morphed his game into more of a power runner. But this was an example of Rodney Hampton's speed at its best.
Yeah, and I do love the point about Lombardi. Everyone thinks Lombardi is simple, run to daylight, sweet play, but this is something where, again, they hand it off to a running back. They hand it off to Gifford, comes around, then pitches it to the quarterback after faking it once. It's really an unbelievable play for a touchdown. It looks like a modern NFL play that was taken and kind of transported back in time, 60 years about. People don't realize that so many of these schemes that teams come up with now and they use, they were used in a different form back in the 50s and 60s. People just don't know it.
Yeah, I mean, Andy Reid's admitted to it, that some of the stuff that they pull is from way back when. But that's what creative minds do. They look for things from the past, try to apply it to today's times, and certainly Vince Lombardi was a man ahead of his time.
All right, let's go to our final matchup in the white bracket, Bob, the 2 and 15 seeds. George Martin, the 78-yard pick six against the Denver Broncos back on November 23rd, 1986. Obviously an iconic play that Giant fans have seen a lot of, and they're going up against Gary Reasons. You mentioned it at the top, a fake punt in the NFC title game on a 4th and 2.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the George Martin play, and let's put it into context, right? At this point in time, the Giants are motoring down the freeway, and they look like they are the best team in the NFC. And the Denver Broncos, with Dan Reeves as head coach and John Elway, and they were really good, they were viewed as one of the best teams in the AFC. So when these two teams met at Giant Stadium for this game, a lot of people were talking about Super Bowl preview. So I think the significance of this play, first of all, George Martin was phenomenal at intercepting balls for a defensive lineman. He had a bunch of picks during the course of his career. And George showed his athleticism, his skill set to be able to get the pass, tip it, and then take off and run. And I think one of the things about the play that's kind of cool is as that 86 team was coming together, sort of the convoy going down the field with the whole group. And then LT's hit on George Martin at the end of the play was kind of funny, too, because he completely whacked him. It was like, dude, it's your teammate. But they were so fired up. So it's a very significant play in the season. This Reasons play I love because everybody always talks about Bill Parcells and the Giants. And, they won those 2 Super Bowls, and they were a run-heavy team that played great defense. But Parcells was one of the great calculated risk takers. They ran a lot of fakes and exotic plays, especially through special teams during the course of his career as head coach. And I mean, think about it. You're running a fake in the NFC Championship game against the 2-time defending Super Bowl champions. And, I think it was one of these kind of check with me situations because there were guys on the field that thought the ball was going to be punted. And then they said, whoa, a second, there's Reasons running right by me. And Gary did a great job to get the first down for the Giants, and obviously that was a field goal game, so every possession was important. So, it's hard to not put that as one of the greatest plays of all time.
And schemed up perfectly. You watch the replay, Bob. That hole, you could fit about 4 Gary Reasons across in that hole. So you're right, it was probably a check with me. They saw the formation the 49ers had out there, and they're like, all right, well, we have to run this.
Well, and that speaks to that coaching staff that had, a tremendous amount of coaches on that staff that were super talented and were aware and understood schemes and everything else. They didn't call it by happenstance. They saw stuff on film that said, hey, in these spots, these guys are bailing. We can catch them, and they caught them with their pants down at the right time.
So obviously the helmet catch, number 1 in this bracket, Bob. We talked about some of these plays already. What play do you think has a dark horse chance to challenge the helmet catch?
Dark horse, I think Victor Cruz is going to have an opportunity to make a little bit of a run here because he was so instrumental in what the Giants did the rest of that 2011 season. I would not sleep on the 15 seed here. I would not sleep on the Reasons fake punt in the NFC title game either because of the significance of it. But again, in 100 years of New York Giants football, you're trying to pick 64 of the greatest plays when you think about the amount of games that have been played and the amount of postseason games that have been played. I mean, you can't go wrong with any of these plays.
Thank you for joining us for the Greatest Plays Bracket Podcast, the White Bracket. For Bob Papa, I'm John Schmeelk. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for all of our other coverage for the Giants' 100th anniversary celebration. And, of course, check out all of our podcast offerings on the Giants mobile app or at giants.com/podcast. For Bob Papa, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time, everybody.